Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this webinar for standard drafters. Today, you will discover a bit more about drafting for XML, and the speakers will speak about technical requirements for figures, to be precise. During this webinar, you will all be muted, so please make sure that you enter your questions in the Q&A panel of the webinar. That is normally mentioned on the next slide, please. Oh yeah, I forgot to tell you that my name is Els, but maybe you know that already. I will be moderating the webinar, so I hope you can hear me well. So as I said, should you have questions, please enter them in the Q&A panel. The speakers will have a look at it after the presentation so that you can have an idea of the answer. Should your question remain unreplied, don't worry, because we always upload a Q&A report on the CEN-CENELEC website, and we will notify you once it is available. You will also receive the presentation and the recording of this webinar in your inbox later today, so that it can be shared with anybody who is interested to look and listen to it as well. Should you be on Twitter, you're always free to tag us or to speak about our trainings with the hashtag Training for Standards. We are on the Standards for EU Twitter account. So let me take a moment to introduce you the speakers of today. My colleagues Amy Jane and Jens are very knowledgeable editors in the Standardization and Digital Solutions department at the CEN-CENELEC Management Center. So please, Amy and Jens, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Els. Good morning, everybody.
Thank you, Els. Good morning.
Okay. So to be discussed today, we have a short introduction for you from Jens, and then some technical requirements from Jens too. And then I will be taking you through some styling and layout, which is linked to the previous webinar that we did using the simple template, and then just some common problems that we meet. So first of all, over to Jens.
Yes, good morning. So basically, we are basing ourselves mainly on the internal regulations part 3. And there we have a dedicated clause on figures, and this contains about the drafting of the figures, its keys, additional text, splitting several figures over a table, etc. You can find examples there, and you can find a certain layout. What we have in this internal regulations is mainly the drafting itself, but we have additional requirements that belong to the electronic handling of the figures. Some years ago, in 2010, there was quite a discussion on the quality of figures, the streamlining of figures, the decision on which formats to use. This then led in CEN to BT 15 2010, and there were the first fundamental requirements on figures that are still applicable today, but in the meantime, we have additional topics that came with the handling of XML. The request to use figures with these minimum requirements and to have them as separate figures is a requirement for CEN, but for CENELEC there is currently no requirement, but for the handling of XML, it is very strongly recommended to do this, to follow the same rule. Next, please. Yeah. So now we go a little bit more into some details. So the transmission notice reminds everyone that for the drafting of the documents, it's mainly the internal regulations part 3 that shall be followed, and this is also for the drafting of the figures. So Amy will later give you a series of examples for the styling. So in CEN, there is the obligation for separate electronic figures. In CEN-CENELEC, it's the recommendation, but it is very difficult to handle the document if these separate figures are not delivered, as then the editors have to extract them from the document with, I would say, limited technical means / software. So then quite often there is a loss of quality, a loss of sharpness, and remaining problems that cannot be solved with our software tools. Next, please. So the original requirements from 2010 were on the two formats to be accepted. And specifically for TIFF, we have additional requirements on the 600 dots per inch to ensure sufficient high resolution for further handling of the documents. This is a requirement that is very much supporting the later publication of the documents at national level. For example, the plotting of documents. Then we have also the compression requirement, LZV. This is a choice that can be made when you handle the document. When you open the document and handle it, you have the opportunity to choose different compression. Compression is very important because too large figures usually disturb the electronic handling of documents very much. Next, please. A very important issue is the sizing of figures. This was afterwards we encountered that the documents have received separate figures in the original delivery. However, the documents that were put by the drafter of the documents were not in the correct sizing. So the documents usually get linked into the Word document as we start all work from Word. Word is the basis on which XML works, and we export later this document into XML from Word. So the figures shall be in the original size, as there's no resizing allowed. Resizing is a problem for the electronic handling, in particular for the export to XML, and in certain cases when we use diagrams or specific solutions where you need to find measures into the drawing, then a resizing could lead to incorrect resizing in the collaboration between abscissa and ordinate. This means that when you resize 100% in height and only 95% in width, that you get wrong reading mistakes. And one of the typical issues is that a figure that is resized gives a wrong impression for the drafters on the quality. So when we export the documents, they are then exported in a different size than, for example, as it was originally in the Word, or a document when we re-enter it with our linking looks like over the page because way too big, or it looks very small and unreadable. So we are requested from the members to not do any resizing. That is the conclusion. Next, please. What we also started to encounter is that there are still quite some figures that face blank spaces. So let's see, because we are not allowed to handling technically exceptionally well, but mainly we are not allowed to deal with technical modification of the figures. But when figures have too much frame, then quite often they go over the page, or the remaining figure text or information is too small, and cropping is always a bit risky for us to cut something off that is not allowed or wanted. What is also an issue, we see sometimes figures that have the correct requirements electronically, meaning the resolution, the physical size, the packaging. But when we open the documents, they look very unreadable in sharpness, text too small, etc. So although the electronic requirements are fulfilled, there is still some insufficient content and rules related requirement. So always keep in mind that quality of figures is not only the electronic requirements, but also the visible and the draft presentation requirement. One of the very specific elements we have is the use of shape elements and text boxes. These are sometimes laid on the figures or behind the figures, and first of all, these get deleted by the electronic tools for XML handling, and it is very difficult for the editors to find out what was deleted where, and also they avoid the XML export at the end. So any modification in the figure needs to be done in the figure itself. Additional information on figures behind or beside figures shall be avoided as much as possible, as it is a risk of making mistakes. To the next, please. So what we also face sometimes, in particular with colored figures, or when photos are used in figures, or photos are used and figures are based on photos, that the electronic size is very huge. And when we have too large electronic size, also the word and the word gets very high in electronic size as well, and this usually causes export problems. And there are cases that it is almost impossible to even export the document, as it is running or it's crashing on Word. So there is, of course, there is no really a requirement, but there are technical limits, I would say. A very specific case are colored figures. And colored figures, a very specific case are colored figures. There we have sometimes the discussions on XML where colored figures are no problem, versus printed versions where information is lost in black and white printing of standards. But for this we have only put a point here for the reconsideration. We cannot give an answer today. Next, please. The file naming comes in fact from the electronic handling of a document. There are limits in using specific signs. There are limits also in the length, and there are sometimes also limits in the use of wording. So the file naming was then to put very simple use of numbers and letters, avoiding as much as possible specific signs and wordings. This is applicable for figures. These are for figures in keys and tables, and also for figures in tables itself. We see quite often figures coming in and requiring the editors a lot of renaming, and wherever renaming is needed, there's a risk of later wrong implementation of figures, which could cause technical corrigenda. So it is advised to simplify the naming and to use simple numbers and letters as we gave in these examples. The figures shall be not language neutral using keys. And why do we remind this? It's still quite often that we find these in diagrams and in some figures as well. So it is very much needed, because these documents are published in all the members' languages, and language neutral figures are the only mean to ensure the use of the figures by all members in all languages. And then we have a specific issue on the title, where we remind the internal regulation for the titles to have always all elements in the title, and to have the title precisely drafted, as one of the elements in Xtiles is to follow a strict set of drafting. Xtiles is a very rigid tool which is based on the internal regulations, and all the rules in Xtiles for the drafting and exports are directly taken from the rules and are in line with rules. If something is not in line with that, it causes trouble and confusion. Next one, please. So this is a good moment to give over to my colleague Amy for giving you styling and layout.
Yeah, thank you, Jens. So yeah, now a little bit about styling and layout using the technical requirements that Jens has just gone through. So we can get this to work. So for the styling, a few sort of basic principles at first. All of the predefined styles can be found in the templates that are found online. Now, we did a webinar on this last month, and this covered the use of both templates for CEN and CENELEC. As I mentioned then, the only difference between those two is the font. So please, if you want to quickly style things, use the templates as a first port of call. Within the templates, we have common styles and then less common styles. So some of the common styles are what we'll cover today: figure image, figure title, key text, and the figure subtitles. And you have some less common styles that you may not use, you may not need to use ever, but they are there. And those are dimension 100, figure note, and figure text. So first things first, the basic styling, we have the common styles. So we start with a very simple figure. In this case, it's our figure 1, which is a beautiful example of a ladder. And as you can see on the left-hand side of your screen, there is figure image and figure title. So it's super simple styling. Both of those styles are available to you in the template. And these styles make sure that everything is center justified. And in the case of title, it's bold. So you don't need to do anything with tabs. You don't need to lay anything in a table if you don't want to. The styles will already justify everything where it needs to be. On the right-hand side, and for the rest of today's examples, we show you how it looks in our HTML file, which we use to quality check our XML. So if there's a problem with the XML, we will see it in the HTML. For a simple figure with a key, the styling is exactly the same as for a simple figure without a key, except for we have some different key styles. So as you can see from the figure, we have a drawing of a bending test, and there's number 1 and number 2. Those number 1 and 2 relate to the key, the platform, and the load plate. So the styling there is figure image, which will central justify it. We then have the key title, which makes the key word itself small. And then you can't see the key text style because we lay it out in a table. And one of the drawbacks of styling in Word is that you can't see what tables are styled as, unfortunately. But if you click on anything within the table, it will tell you how it's styled. So just trust that for this example today, it's styled as key text. It just makes it a bit smaller. And then, of course, we have the figure title. And as Jens has just said, Xstyles is very rigid in that it expects certain styles after certain styles. So it will expect either key title after figure image, or it will expect figure title after figure image. So if it doesn't have either of those, we will receive a warning error. And again, to the right, there's the example. It's lovely. It's all styled perfectly, and XML is happy with it. So next we have the example of subfigures, including a key. Now the rules with subfigures is that they are acceptable. We do allow to have subfigures. What we wouldn't allow is for you to have figure 8a with its own key and then some text, and figure 8b and its own key and then some text. If you do split a figure, please split it how we show you on the screen now. So make sure you have A, B, and then a title to cover both of that with one key that handles both figures. So in our example here, we've got a test for stability. We have figure image and figure subtitle because, again, that's what Xstyles expects. After figure image, there has to be some kind of title, whether that's figure subtitle, key title, or figure title. Again, everything is central justified, and with the figure subtitle, you can remove the bold if you want to. For me, I think it looks better with the bold, but it is personal preference. We've then got figure image again, figure subtitle. The key is exactly the same as on the previous slide. So you have the key title and then the key text. Lay it out in a table, please. And again, on the right-hand side, you can see how that looks for us when we quality check the XML. So that's pretty straightforward and pretty simple too. We then have some less common styles. So as I mentioned, we have dimension 100, which basically suggests that any of the dimensions within the figure itself are in millimeters, in meters, centimeters, anything you want. But the styling for that has to be dimension 100, and that makes it a font size smaller, and right justifies it. So it'll pop it on the right-hand side. What we sometimes see with dimensions is that if they're laid out in a table, they'll be tabbed, or they'll just be tabbed over anyway, and they'll be in plain body text. It's fine, but if you want it, this is how it's supposed to be laid out. So it's much quicker just to use the style. And the same thing again, figure image, key title, key text, figure title. So again, that should be fairly straightforward. We then have figure notes, which is another less common style that you might not need to use, but if you have a note that's specific to a figure that's not necessarily in the main body of the text, this is something that you can use. So you just, it follows the same route as a note. So you can have no requirements, recommendations, or permissions in there. And if you have multiple notes, they follow the same numbering conventions as within the text. So if you have 2 or 3 notes, you need to number them. The styling is much the same, except for this time we use figure note. And you will need to do note in capital letters with a tab. The only thing figure note styles is it just makes it a smaller font size, but that won't give you any problems. So it's not obligatory to use that, but it's there if you do need it. And the final less common style that we have is figure text. So figure text is something that's not necessarily a note, but it still gives explanatory or supplementary information that you can't really place inside a key, or as I said, doesn't go into a figure note. This exact same principle, type out what you need and then you just style it as figure text. It won't do anything special to the text, it'll just contain it within the figure. Again, fairly straightforward. None of this is particularly difficult, so you shouldn't have too many problems. For the actual layout, we spoke about laying out the figure in a key, the key in a table, sorry. The key has to be in a table. It's something that the editors can do. But if you have a lot of figures in your text, this can get quite time consuming for us. So it's something to be aware of. So how exactly do you do this? I've got a little example here on the screen for you. So you highlight the whole of your table as shown here. And then you go to the top of your banner on Word and you've got table tools. So you want to select design and then go further to the right and you have borders. If you select this drop down menu, you can pick no border. The problem with that is that then you can't see exactly where your borders are. So if you reselect the drop down menu, you have view grid lines right at the very bottom. And what this allows you to do is it makes it a dotted line like this. It's kind of like a ghost border. So although there's no borders showing, it will show you what is there. When you print the document or when you convert the PDF, those lines disappear. So that's how we have our PCs set up. It's a very good way to see what's in a table and what isn't, and it can help you quite a bit. I already mentioned that it doesn't show table stylings, but again, this is styled as key text. And again, for the simple figure layout, you can rely just on the styles. A lot of the styles come with preset justification and preset bold and that kind of thing. So basically rely on the styles where you can. Sometimes you might want to lay out subfigures in tables. So where you have a large number of subfigures, for example, A to D, and they don't all fit on one page, if you do it in a linear fashion, you can lay them out in a table. So what we have for this is a bit of a different styling thing going on. So you lay it out in a table, you follow the steps to hide the borders, as we've spoken about, and then you need to style everything as table body. And the reason for that is because if it's in a table, it's a table body. So this follows the same rules as table array that we spoke about in the previous webinar. After this, the same styles apply for the key title and the key text if you have those, and the figure title too. For the styling of the figure subtitle, you might need to rebold it and rejustify it because table body just styles the table. It doesn't really add bold or anything like that. So you might need to manually adjust the justification to center or make it bold again. That might happen, but it needs to be table body. So just to recap on some rules for figures from the internal regulations part 3. So as Jens already mentioned, they have to be language neutral. This is something we will look at and we may reject if it's not a quick fix. Figures can't be split. So I did mention this very briefly. You can't have figure 8A and then some text and then figure 8B and then some text. You have to have figure A and figure B together under the same title with the same key. If we see this, if it's a large amount of work, then we will refer it back to you and we'll ask you to fix it because obviously that can lead into some technical changes and we might make some mistakes. If it's a very quick fix and it's clear that the key is the same, the editor will more than likely fix it, but then we'll let you know. This is one of the rules that we follow fairly strictly. And the final one is just that figures shall be explicitly referred to within the text. And this doesn't have to be too difficult. So if you do happen to forget to do this or you're revising a standard and it's not present, it can be as simple as figure 1 shows, figure 3 illustrates, or see figure 6b. And there are some really good examples of that within IR3 itself. But if in doubt, do get in touch and we can help you. So now for some very common problems that we meet when we edit your text and you include some figures. And the main problem that we have is the poor quality of figures. So sometimes we receive texts that have figures that conform to all of the quality check means, but then we open them and as you can see from the figure that I've manipulated here, it's awful to look at. It's not clear, it's not sharp. If there's any key numbers or key letters on that, it's going to be very difficult to see. This has in the past been cause for many corrigenda and correction notices, which make the standard a bit more difficult to use at the end. So when you do insert your figures, make sure they are of a good quality, that they're sharp, as Jens said, that they're clear, that they're readable, all of that, because this is what we have to play with. And as Jens already said, we can't fix them. We're not technically trained in that way. Another problem that we have is missing figures or figures not provided or incorrectly inserted, that kind of thing. And what this leads to is an unusable XML. This is what we see in the HTML when we quality check our XML. It basically just is missing. We have a lot of members now, and indeed the translators, who are creating PDF from the XML file. And so if they don't have figures or they're missing, specifically mainly for CENELEC, they can't use the XML file to create a PDF. And that limits the devices on which they can use the standard. So do just bear that in mind. If you do have the figure files for CENELEC, do send them over because it helps us to avoid this. For CEN, you have to, because otherwise this is what we have. We do have a tool for you to use to check the quality of your figures, and you can do this before you submit anything to us. And this tool is found on Projex-Online. So if you log in, you have on the right-hand side a number of options. One of these is image quality check. You may already have used this. If you haven't, I'm going to talk you through it right now. So we click on image quality check, and you are presented with this screen. And this basically just explains to you, it's a lot to read through right now, so don't worry about it, but it basically just explains that it's going to check your figures based on the requirements given on the BOSS site. Specifically, I believe it's using the CEN BOSS site, but the rules are the same for CENELEC. So it'll check the quality of your figures, the figures that are contained in the Word file, and it'll look for any shapes, because as Jens already mentioned, shapes and auto shapes are absolutely not allowed. It checks the draft standard as a document and the figure files. So anything else that you include in the folder to be checked will be ignored. So you need to zip up what you want to check. You can zip up the whole entire standards delivery package that you plan to send to CCMC, or you can just check what you want to check. It's entirely up to you. The important thing to remember is it will check the draft standard as the Word document and the figure files. Anything else it will ignore. Then you're going to click upload, and that will work a little bit. And then shortly after, you should receive an email. And within that email, there's our drafter, our example of a zip file, sorry. So within that email, you will receive an Excel sheet. And within this Excel sheet, it will give you some feedback on the naming of your figures, on the file types used, and whether or not it conforms to the technical requirements. So if we start off with the naming of the figures, as you can see here, I have had it check a few different types of figures. So I've named some wrong, I've got the wrong format, I've got different DPIs, I've got no compression, blah, blah, blah. But for the file name, I have a bitmap image, which is not permitted, and I have a JPEG image, which is not permitted. Everything else is TIFF, which is Adobe Photoshop, and everything conforms to the right naming. So that's how it shows up there. So double check your naming with this. The width and the height generally tend to be okay. The resolution, I manipulated this and made it a much lower resolution than it needs to be. As you can see, we've got 600 DPI because those two are JPEG and bitmap. It hasn't really checked those, but TIFF it has. However, the coloring is fine and the compression is fine. So with the JPEG image and the bitmap image, the compression is not okay. So take a look at this Excel file. If anything isn't clear on this, you can get in touch with us and we will go through it with you. But this should be fairly clear. It should give you an indication of what will go wrong with your figures when you submit to us. So some more common problems that we meet. We often get asked what single layer per page means, or single layer page. And this basically just means that you haven't merged the layers of your figure. So there's many different layers during the drafting or editing process of your figure, and that can lead to a very large file size. If you merge the layers together, it reduces the size of the figure. And this is a really good idea if you have lots of figures. Because as Jens said, when we have lots of figures and they're very large file sizes, sometimes Xstyles just crashes and we can't get XML at all, or it's very difficult for us to get XML. So maybe try that if you have a lot of figures and they're quite large. Again, to remember the language neutrality of figures as well. It helps to use an editable key. So use figures and numbering and lettering in your figure instead of actual words and sentences. This helps the translators out, and what we notice as well, it aids smoother revisions for the figures while you're drafting. Sometimes we have TCs who want to change a number within a figure or a a definition of a key, something like that, it's easier if we can do it within a key instead of doing it in the figure itself. And as I've already said, if in doubt about your figures at any point, get in touch with us at production@CEN-CENELEC.eu. Somebody will guide you to an editor, and then we can guide you through the process that you need, and we can offer you some tailor-made help if you have specific questions. So now just an ending thought from Jens we have.
Hello, Jens, are you still there? I
Is
see you're
Jens there?
muted.
Yes, sorry.
Okay.
It is maybe a good idea to close the presentation, which is quite technical, with a more philosophical outlook. And this is something we thought about, is that using standardized figures, following standardization rules and regulations in a standardized way in a technical standard is the ultimate goal of a standardizer, which the editors feel themselves quite often as real standardizers, as they try to streamline the text as much as